And to get you in the mood now, BBC Two Clive Barker with the final part of his terrifying A to Z.
The British-born actress Barbara Steele has a face, a look, unlike anyone else in movies. Most of her Italian-made horror films, particularly Mario Bava's Black Sunday, are modern-day cults. She does what few actresses are capable of doing. She lets you see both destruction and delight in the same pair of eyes.
Once you see Barbara Steele, you know, you never forget her. You know, she's probably one of the real only like horror goddesses, you know, actresses ever, really, in the sense that there's a timelessness which she has in terms of like, you know, she seems like an old soul that's been around forever, reincarnated zillions of times into many different incarnations.
What do you want?
There was a depth to her. On the surface, she was a beautiful brunette woman. Beneath that, and you could almost get poetic here, looking into her eyes, you could see layer upon layer upon layer. I could probably best and inadequately describe it as a kind of exotic mystery.
I usually played these roles where I was represented the dark side. I was always a predatory bitch goddess in all of these movies, and with all kinds of unspeakable elements of necrophilia and rising from the dead and perpetuating curses. Then what is life without a dark side? What do you have? You've got Switzerland, you've got Heidi, you know. Hopefully Heidi's got a dark side. What have you got, the cuckoo clock? I mean, please, you know. So drama, the driving force of drama is the dark side. I was studying painting in London at the Chelsea Art School, and some talent scout saw me, and I signed this deal. That's how I came to the States. I don't know why the studio got into their head to make me a blonde, but this is something that they did. I felt like a total lie as a blonde, because it didn't suit my nature, which is pretty dark. And I said to myself, I'm out of here. I found myself in Rome, and I was wildly grateful to be in Italy. It felt right. I felt centered. I felt embraced and adored. It was like living in the middle of Beethoven's Fifth or something. I find it very interesting that in this great period of phenomenal optimism in Italy that these horror movies came out, because the dark side is always going to express itself somewhere. And the kickoff was Black Sunday.
My revenge will strike down you and your accursed house, and in the blood of your sons and the sons of their sons, I will continue to live immortal. They will restore to me the life that you now rob from me. I shall return to torment and destroy throughout the nights of time.
These women that I played were usually very powerful women, and they suffered for it. And I guess men like that, because you saw these powerful women that you usually adulteresses, full of lust, greed, playing out all this arena of repressed stuff. And then I always, in the end, seemed to get it. And there was always this sort of morality play, this sort of final payoff. And that was very consoling to everybody because, i.e., quote, the dark goddess can't just go on wreaking hubris and havoc ad infinitum. She gets her comeuppance, too.
I'm going to torture you, Isabella. I'm going to make you suffer for your faithlessness to me. You harlot!
What I think these films do is that they basically fill you with a psychic dread, and they address the soul.
Well, when I was younger, my room, my parents boarded up my room. I had two big windows, and they boarded it up to like a small kind of slit window. And seeing movies like Pit and the Pendulum, and when you see her eyes like glaring out of the Iron Maiden, you know, I could certainly relate to that, looking out my window, you know, and feeling those, that kind of trapped feeling. Those Italian horror films. I always found them to be actually psychologically, made me feel comfortable. Actually, there's something about her and those films that do tap into the unconscious and make you actually feel better about the abstractions of life.
Oh, thank heavens. For a moment I thought that your heart had stopped.
My heart isn't beating, Alan. Hasn't beaten for 10 years. I'm dead, Alan. Dead.
A number of the pictures that Barbara made in the 60s, like Castle of Blood and The Long Hair of Death and some other, The Ghost, some other pictures, although they played on double bills in drive-ins and grindhouses, they were a little sexually more daring than certainly the domestic pictures. And even though most of them had been re-edited before they got to America, it was very difficult to take out all of the undertones of necrophilia and lesbianism.
Don't cry. You're safe now.
I liked doing all of these scenes that had these forbidden aspects to them. Necrophilia, incest, all these violent kind of repressed emotions. I like that a lot.
Kiss me, warm me.
I think that's really a great arena to work in.
Alan, my dearest, you will give me life.
I believe that she consciously exuded a kind of eroticism that even a 12-year-old could pick up on. And we used to have a joke in school, when Barbara's coffin exploded, so did ours.
Look into my eyes. Embrace me. You will die, but I can bring you pleasures mortals cannot know.
She played this sexy witch, did a lot of smoldering, basically, which was just the thing for kids who were beginning to get interested in sex, but still were interested in monsters, and Barbara was a sexy monster, so it was sort of okay.
There is always a high level of sexuality in every horror film because you're dealing with death and very primal things, and you've always got to have this juxtaposition of a subtext of a very powerful sexual subtext, whatever is going on. Whether you're walking down a staircase, how you touch a banister. I mean, you try and invest it with this kind of force.
When The Terrible Secret of Dr. Hitchcock was released in America, a kind of gimmick was an erotophile card. Warning, the girl's figure on this card has been treated with the erotophile process. You will find it pleasurable to stroke it gently with your fingertips. However, prolonged stroking may be dangerous. And this is the little figure you stroke, and as you can see, prolonged stroking is dangerous after all. Look what it did to me.
Barbara, I think, found herself in the 70s being cast by people like David Cronenberg and me and Jonathan Demme, based on the fact that we had all seen her when we were growing up, and that she had made an indelible impression on us that a lot of people who are her contemporaries didn't.
Everybody wanted to chat to me about my 60s horror films, and I just wouldn't talk about it. I was in total denial about them. I pushed them all aside because I felt that they had tripped me up in terms of working, and I just didn't want to deal with them and over, and I didn't want anyone to love me for the horror movies. I did not.
I first became a fan of Barbara Steele from seeing photographs of her, stills from movies. In the past few years, there seems to have been a Barbara boom with sort of mini-industry springing up with calendars, T-shirts. I've got a signed calendar myself hanging in my bathroom. Life basically is full of very boring situations. And when I watch one of Barbara's films or I look at photos of her, I'm immediately lifted out of that. I'm transported to somewhere else.
I've actually got a fan letter from Jeffrey Dahmer. I didn't discover it until 2 years later because I never opened my fan mail. And I actually finally hired someone to open my fan mail and deal with it because I feel quite uncomfortable with it because I don't know who they really think that they are addressing, you know. And then one day he comes out of my office and says, "There's this letter from Jeffrey Dahmer who wants a photograph of you, and specifically one of the photographs of you where you have the holes in your face, which is really extraordinary." I've met a lot of my fans, and a lot of them are completely charming. I don't know what it is I represent to them. It's a mystery to me, huh? Maybe they all hate their mothers and they want to see her tied up to the stake. I don't know. I don't know what it is.
I did actually once go to a party dressed as Barbara Steele. It was a horror party and we had to go as our favorite characters, and I chose her in The Mask of Satan, which is the part that I'm actually preparing for now. And the first thing that people saw when they arrived was me chained to a stake in the doorway, as she is at the beginning of the film.
There are those who believe, and those who do not.
You did not know that you were born for this moment. You did not know that your life had been consecrated to me by Satan.
I can only imagine that they sense something in me, and what it is that they sense maybe is some kind of psychic pain, some kind of childhood grief, some kind of isolation, and some unresolved pain, actually.
It's funny that when people see that as kind of scary and dark and psychotic, and, or, you know, like they're schizophrenic, when in fact everybody has those sides of duality, and the healthiest people are the ones that explore that, and she's gotten to do it on film, which is a really healthy way of doing it and a fun way of doing it. And she's got an incredible strength and yet a mystery, which is something that you don't learn in acting school or something. You know, it's just something you have or you don't have. And she has it.
Everybody knows that when we're born, a ruthless system of biological machinery takes over. Sex or birth, they either function to plan, which is awesome, or they go wrong, which is the stuff of nightmares.
It's a boy.
In the past, over a third of women died in hospital in vain attempts to give birth. A woman might well fear as much for herself as for her unborn child. And there were other fears. In a more religious age, devils and demons were the stuff of real belief. Could a woman deliver the spawn of the supernatural? The nightmare of the incubus was never far off, nor were its monstrous children. Modern anxieties combine with those more ancient fears in Ira Levin's masterpiece, Rosemary's Baby, later a classic movie.
I thought, well, I want this woman to have a child that the reader knows is not what she's expecting, but I didn't want to get into a realistic situation with birth defects and all, because that is not the stuff of entertainment as I see it. So the choices seem to be either something from outer space or from Satan.
I think when a woman chooses to have a child, and she really thinks about who she's mating with. Who is this man? Where does he come from? When his sperm meets my egg, what's going to happen? She really doesn't know that there's a moment of very old, dark fear, something that is as huge as the universe, as vast and mysterious, and at the same time, it's very simple and frightening.
Lovemaking between Rosemary and her husband, Guy, sanctioned by God in their marriage, becomes the channel for the devil to plant his satanic seed.
Rosemary slept a while, and then Guy came in and began making love to her. He stroked her with both hands, a long, relishing stroke that began at her bound wrists, slid down over her arms, breasts, and loins, and became a voluptuous tickling between her legs. He repeated the exciting stroke again and again, his hands hot and sharp-nailed, and then, when she was ready, more than ready, he slipped a hand in under her buttocks, raised them, lodged his hardness against her, and pushed it powerfully in. He was wearing, because it was to be a costume party, a suit of coarse leather armor. He lay forward upon her, his other arm sliding under her back to hold her, his broad chest crushing her breasts. She opened her eyes and looked into yellow furnace eyes, smelled sulfur and tannis root, felt wet breath on her mouth, heard lust grunts and the breathing of onlookers. This is no dream, she thought. This is real. This is happening.
During the time that the book came out, people were questioning religious values, and they were asking themselves politically too where they stood. And the book shocked a lot of people who wouldn't have connected religion. in the same ways that Ira Levin did.
She was brought up in a strict Catholic household, a large family with many sisters and brothers, and she was brought up to be a good, obedient girl.
He made us think about how religion ties us, binds us to certain values. And even if we question them, even if we're forced to look at them in ways we never had before, it becomes part of us. It's as archaic as our fears and our anxieties.
At the end of the novel, Rosemary gives birth to the devil's child, a moment of horror, which is also one of revelation.
Pregnancy is the ultimate creative act. Having come through it, I think it gave her a great strength and courage. It's kind of like the maternal instinct takes over, and she is going to defend that child and make that child as healthy as she possibly can.
She now looks at this baby, and all of her Catholic beliefs come into fashion. She doesn't question anything anymore. What made her in the beginning frightened and afraid, but what gave her faith to carry this child to term and ultimately to look at this child and want to care for it was that Catholicism, was that link to spirit. So it created a kind of circle that closed itself, but it made a lot of people uncomfortable because then you have to ask yourself, what will you do in the name of religion?
In the 1930s, the old gods enjoyed their golden age, courtesy of one Howard Philip Lovecraft. His works, clotted, paranoid narratives about the clash between man and the supernatural, are dense and difficult, but for anyone interested in horror, completely indispensable.
The nightmare corpse city of Rilya that was built in measureless eons behind history by the vast, loathsome shapes that seeped down from the dark stars. There lay great Cthulhu and his hordes, hidden in green, slimy vaults and sending out thoughts that spread fear to the dreams of the sensitive.
Howard Phillips Lovecraft is regarded as the most important writer of American dark fantasy since Edgar Allan Poe. At the heart of his work is an extraordinary mythology, great Cthulhu and the elder gods, powers so unspeakable the very sight of them drives men to madness. Director and producer Brian Yuzna has come in search of this strange and secret writer in Lovecraft's hometown of Providence, Rhode Island.
As a filmmaker, I've often gone to Lovecraft to get inspiration, and when you read Lovecraft, I would defy you to tell me exactly what the story is. It's very elusive, but the feelings of dread and the feelings of horror are always there, very palpably so. That is not dead which can eternal lie, and in strange eons even death may die. In his house at Rilya, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming.
Be careful not to call up that which you can't put down. Always have the words for laying the dead ready.
Can we invoke the chaos of Cthulhu that Lovecraft wrote about here at his grave?
I think certainly in some sense, but be careful what you do call up.
So is this a special place, a final resting place of H.P. Lovecraft to the people in Providence?
I don't think to the people in Providence, but there are people all over the world that come here to look at this grave.
And are they the ones that leave the pennies and
yes, yeah.
Scribble on the back?
Well, yes. I mean, these pennies will disappear. Others will take their places.
Do you have any relation to him yourself?
Of course. And we all go back to the same families. You're talking 300 years of people who lived here. Everybody in Providence, all Yankee Providence, has probably read his stories, but they're not going to talk about it much, and he's, in a sense, almost a social embarrassment.
Did they feel like he really was messing around and calling up kind of occult things? And
No. They just thought he was a nutcase.
I am Providence, and Providence is myself. Together, indissolubly as one, we stand through the ages. I know always that I am an outsider, a stranger in this century, and amongst those who are still men. I can never be tied to raw new things, for I first saw the light in an old town.
staying on Benefit Street and being in the neighborhood of Lovecraft, albeit it's 50 years later, it really makes you feel like you're getting another dimension on his stories. That Providence itself almost takes on a different cast.
His stories were inspired by this town. He was an odd man with obsessional hatreds, which included all forms of alcohol, seafood, dogs, and motion pictures.
When I was growing up, I learned about Lovecraft from people who knew him. It was kind of an underground sort of thing. He wasn't considered a respectable writer, but in the genre, he was considered to be one of the best. He was a local boy who made good, a peculiar local boy who made good, but a local boy nonetheless.
And did he frequent this library?
He did.
I guess for Lovecraft, this was kind of a special place because of its connection with Edgar Allan Poe.
Exactly. Edgar Allan Poe visited the library on a number of occasions. I think one of the attractions this library held for Lovecraft was the fact that Poe had physically been here and that his spirit, in some sense, still lingered. Lovecraft would have loved these stacks.
Yeah, this is great.
These are some of the first editions, the original Arkham House first editions. As you can see, they've been read. Looks a bit like Woody Allen in this shot.
Yeah, he does.
Both of Lovecraft's parents died in an insane asylum. His father died when Lovecraft was 8. His mother died when he was 32. As soon as his mother died, Lovecraft wrote a story called Beyond the Wall of Sleep, where he is a psychiatrist in an insane asylum. And as a psychiatrist, he finds a degenerate man, his term, that he communicates with by attaching a special machine to his head, and discovers inside him is a noble soul from beyond the universe fighting noble causes. And I really think this is a story about Lovecraft's father and his wish for him. His father died from syphilis.
So he actually died insane.
Insane,
when
raving,
Lovecraft was
paralyzed,
about 8 years old.
drooling. And I think Lovecraft was trying to say in his story Beyond the Wall of Sleep, my father isn't a degenerate patient. My father is a noble being, and I want to be with him again. That's what I think that story is about.
And his mother also died insane.
She began to hallucinate and died in the same hospital about 20 years later. And I think he was always worried that the illness that made his father and mother go mad might finally affect him.
How was he brought up?
He never spent a night away from home until he was 32. She hovered over him and doted over her only child, although she also told him that he was very ugly, and also told him that he was a little girl up until about the age of 6.
And she dressed him up in
as
dresses?
a little girl. And he grew up with this crippling self-identity.
And yet he never wrote women into his stories.
There are women who are raped by demons from outer space and give birth to monsters. Women are pretty much uniformly portrayed as treacherous, dominating, or dangerous figures.
Where do you think he got his ideas then?
We know that he got most of his ideas from his dream materials. He was a prodigious letter writer and document keeper, and wrote his colorful, complex, vivid dreams in detail, and wrote his stories from his dream material.
Before you know it, you've wandered off into this sort of dreamlike reality. And what's really interesting is how a lot of the stories deal with the spheres beyond. I feel like to understand Lovecraft, you really have to understand that that boy was looking up into the sky, and there's a kind of a horror out there.
And so would have this been the same telescope that was here when Lovecraft visited?
Yes, he did many observing here, and he did articles for the Providence Journal paper.
Uh-huh. He was somewhat of an amateur astronomer.
Yes, and I think he wanted to become a professional, but he failed his algebra test.
So once he failed algebra, that was it?
That was it.
So you haven't noticed his spirit around here lately?
No, I haven't noticed his spirit lately around here.
Out of the fungus-ridden earth steamed up a vaporous corpse light, yellow and diseased, which bubbled and lapped to a gigantic height in vague outlines, half human and half monstrous. It was all eyes, wolfish and mocking, and the rugose insect-like head dissolved to a thin stream of mist.
He created a fusion between science fiction and horror, which was unique, especially in the 20s when he was working. He created the idea that the monstrous forces that were considered demons by primitive religions were actually extraterrestrials or interdimensional creatures, and set up this sort of cosmic horror which was different from the old supernatural horror which was going out of vogue, and he gave a sort of a new life to the horror story in doing this.
But it seems like there's also a number of people that take it seriously, that seem to feel his stories were touching on a real world.
Well, there is something, and you do get that especially here in Rhode Island, that everyone that was afraid to be where they were was driven out. All the other Puritan colonies in the early colonial days all ended up in Rhode Island, which was known then as Rogues Island.
So your idea is that Rhode Island and Providence in particular is where everybody that was persecuted in the rest of America at that time took refuge.
Yes, but some of them probably deserved to be persecuted. I think that's what makes the place interesting in terms of the horror atmosphere.
So what was the final horror that was behind his stories?
It was, in his view, absurd to believe that the universe was centered around human beings, or that we had any real valid place or meaning, that this was just a gigantic chaos, a meaningless madness of which we were a tiny speck of no significance at all.
He seems to have given up the religious-oriented horror and terror of the previous centuries and embraced the idea of a mankind that has somehow been abandoned by its gods. And the horror of Lovecraft is the horror of being inconsequential in the universe.
Well, only in Providence can we come out at midnight and sit on a tomb where H.P. Lovecraft and Edgar Allan Poe read their poetry.
Well, this is a favorite tomb for Providence residents, whether they're above the ground or below it. And this is a place where Lovecraft courted, where Poe courted. He was fascinated by the idea that Benefit Street once ran through a graveyard, and that graveyard was moved, leaving some of the bodies scattered in some of the cellar holes. That's the origin of one of his most famous tales, The Shunned House, where one of the bodies has not been moved, but unfortunately it moves itself.
And the Shunned House is just up the street?
Just up the street.
So this became Lovecraft's spooning spot of choice. Is that what he did here?
There is evidence that he took his one sweetheart, who was Sonia Green, here and showed her this favorite spot.
And what would he do when he held court on the tombs?
He would talk about Poe's life. He might read a poem by Poe. He also would recite the Necronomicon, that dreadful book of the names of the dead.
We've been warned that we shouldn't deal with these quotations and that bad things could befall us.
I would say this is a very dangerous place to start reciting the Necronomicon.
Good evening, Mr. Usner.
us yearned for immortality, for ourselves or for a loved one. But as the sages say, be careful what you wish for. It might come true.
Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Papa's gonna buy you a mockingbird. If that mockingbird don't sing, Papa's gonna buy you a diamond ring. If your diamond ring turned brass, Papa's gonna buy you a looking glass.
It's sometimes hard to admit the beauty of these photographs. You have a dichotomy between a wonderfully composed picture, and yet it's a picture of a dead person. As an eye surgeon, I became interested in how people see, how they understand the world, and visual perception, recognizing that perception has to do with the pictures we make in our brain as well as what we see. One of the things that astounded me was that as a collector, I soon recognized that the second most common type of genre photograph in the 19th century was the photograph of a dead person. And yet it was missing from our history. Now, what would happen if you had never had a picture of yourself or of your child and the child died? If your only opportunity was to take a picture of the deceased child, of the dead child or your dead wife, then that's what was done. So that many of these photographs are the only photographs that the person had, especially in the early years of photography, and that one would rather have any type of photograph as none at all. Here, a mother holds not her child, but a daguerreotype of her dead child. It was a novel way to solve the contradiction, the need to push the dead away and the need to keep the dead alive.
Dreams repeat a sweet but lonely song to me.
Just because one was murdered did not mean one did not have a memorial photograph. Here we have a picture of the Parsons family, 5 members of one family who were killed by a Mr. Hamilton. This picture is not a documentary photograph as proof of their murder, but a memorial photograph to be sent to family, friends, and loved ones.
Be still, my haunted heart.
By the end of the 19th century, the beautification of death created an image of a person lying in a silken or satin casket surrounded by flowers in a beautiful, comfortable setting. In this photograph, we have a typical Sleeping Beauty. We have a woman who's lying just at rest, as if one could go over and kiss her and wake her up.
Dreams are dust, it's you who must belong to me.
You could be cleaned up, your tissues could be filled, you could be beautified. Cosmetology became important. And as time went on, the person became more lifelike in death. And one of the things that you see in photography, or you see some comments at the time, is how, quote, lifelike the person looked, how the person looked as if they were still alive, but they never looked any better.
Soon, oh soon, the dark will fall.
You could look at that picture as long as you want. Some person will look at it for a fraction of a second. Another will stare at it or come back to it again and again and again and again. And the fascination of learning something about death, it's a mental thing that goes on about maybe they could learn this, maybe there's some information in the photograph, something they learn about passing that barrier between the living and the dead.
You'll be the sweetest little baby in town.
Classic Edgar Allan Poe coming up next on BBC Two. John Hurd stars in The Cask of Amontillado. And Clive Barker explains the tradition of horror in this BBC book which accompanies the series.
This is a man not often seen lost for words, until now.